All right. So basically this week we're just going to be going through some additional problems, kind of doing some basically review for the exam, trying to get ready for that exam. So on Thursday, I had a kind of late canceling class. I had a lot of you reach out asking for last minute help on the project, so I thought that'd probably be a lot more valuable to a lot of you. So we didn't really have anything new to cover. We have plenty of time to kind of review things this week. Thank you. Test. Is that better? All right, there we go. So, hopefully it's just more people saying it's better. Okay. What was I saying? Oh, the exam. So it'll be kind of similar to the last one in that there will be a small kind of number of multiple choice questions. And then probably about, I say small number, probably anywhere between 8 and 10. I'm still kind of finalizing it. And then about 4 to 5 short answer, kind of with different parts, kind of depending exactly on what I want to do with some of them. There might be 4, might be 5, but they'll have like parts A and B. So we will, I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of that on Thursday. When I have I should have it kind of completely written, kind of depending on what we talk about today. And it should be open. I'll probably make it open next week from Monday to Thursday. So you can get on and take it at any point, like whatever works with your schedule. Once you start it, you'll have an allotted amount of time. I'll probably say that 2 hours, like a typical final exam period. And then once you start, you have to complete within that 2 hour time frame, kind of upload your work to the short answers, kind of similar to the midterm. But that will be available next week from Monday to the end of the day, Thursday. Okay. Any questions from me before we kind of get into things here? So obviously, I don't have all your projects created yet. That'll probably be something that might not get done until kind of finals week, or at least I'll probably start working on it towards the end of this week, but finals week, I'll be kind of working on those as you guys are working on the final. I got the fourth homework completely graded up there on Canvas, so that should be factored into your grade as well. So the question of whether or not the final is going to be cumulative, it's not going to be cumulative in the sense that it focuses on what we've covered since the end of the last exam. It is cumulative in the sense that if I ask you about, some of the things that we talked about prior to the second exam have been incorporated into what we're doing now. So it's cumulative in the sense of we've built to the point we're at now, but not cumulative in the sense that I'm not going to be asking you about what was something that was really specific to last time. I won't be asking you about, specific differences in profit versus win maximization in the win market, right? Or broadcasting, right? We haven't kind of worked with those since the second exam. So in that sense, it won't be cumulative. We'll mainly be focusing. And I think you'll see as we work through some of the practice problems, it's mainly things that we've covered since the second exam. Okay. It's just that some of the principles from before that will be built in. Okay. Any other questions? So I put up a folder with final exam practice problems. So we'll be kind of working through some of these. Tomorrow I'll get a kind of answer key up to these, but when we do stuff in class to these problems, I might add a lot more of additional work in or some variants into what we do in class that might not appear in the answer key, okay? I'll also get that fourth homework's answer key up there as well. I just kind of got done grading all of those today, so now I'll be getting that fourth homework. You'll kind of see a folder with the homework and the answer key there. Really that, and as soon as the due date on that fifth homework is up, I'll post the answer key to that, so you'll have those kind of study as well. Okay. So open that practice problems, and we'll kind of go through a couple of the short answers, the multiple choice here, and then we'll go through some of the short answer later. So very first one hopefully will seem relatively easy, right? Some of these multiple choices are probably some of the easier points in the exam. So suppose that demand for baseball has been increasing over the last 5 years. If we compare 2019 or 2020 average salaries to 2015, what would we expect, right? No change, higher, lower, or an unpredictable change, right? Well, the real difference we have here is that demand for the sport has been increasing. Okay? So let's go to the dot cam here. What this question is trying to tie together, and I feel like the lights aren't on all over here. Let me see if that helps. I don't know if that light necessarily is going to help us a lot. All right, I think this will hopefully show up pretty good. So what this question is trying to tie together is that anytime we see something, right, that if we were to look at that win market, and typically we thought about that with a constant marginal cost. So here's where demand and marginal revenue were before. If demand for the sport increases, that's increasing the demand and marginal revenue per win overall for those teams as well. So you probably would never be like required to draw this change, right? But we do know that any increase in the demand for that sport is going to cause the demand and marginal revenue curve to shift upward, which in turn, right? If we're looking at the labor market, thinking about the wages, the average wages of players, right? As long as there's no supply differences here, and if this was a short answer, I'd probably specify a little more on the exam. I was writing these kind of practice problems a little bit quicker. We're assuming the supply of labor hasn't changed from 2015 to 2019 either, right? So we've got our demand curve for labor in 2015, right? We kind of expect the equilibrium quantity of labor in 2015 and the equilibrium wage for labor in 2015 to be where supply and demand intersect, right? If you really wanted to, you could add in some additional things like monopoly or monopsony power, but here we weren't told any of those, so we're just going to think about what would happen if we see the demand for the sport increase, which, remember, the demand curve for labor is the marginal revenue per win times the number of additional wins that labor would bring in. Well, we set up here, we know that the marginal revenue per win and the demand curve are going to be increasing overall for the sport. So if the marginal revenue per win is increasing over time, that's going to drive up our demand curve for labor when we look at 2019. So if we look at the equilibrium wage, which I believe is all the question focused on, but you could also think about if we didn't have roster limits or anything like that, we would also see kind of this increase in the equilibrium quantity. So we see higher wages, higher quantity, and this really what this stems from is understanding that demand or marginal revenue changes for that sport are going to be driving the demand curve for labor through this marginal revenue per win component. Okay, so even if the quality of all the players stays the same, the demand for that labor will go up because it's worth more to that team. Right, the same number of wins would bring in additional amount of revenue there. Okay. Any questions on this one? This one shouldn't be too bad, but maybe if anytime like this week, I'm trying to get you guys ready for the final. But really, like any questions you have, like, well, what if this changed? What I want to make sure that I answer your questions because those are the ones that will kind of be the best to have answered so that you can do better on the exam. So it's not just what I'm kind of going through here. If you have any questions, like, well, what if this changed? What if this we had this component going on? Any questions on this one? All right, like I said, this first one starting us off shouldn't have been too bad. It was a relatively easy one. So suppose that we've got the NBA labor market and we see that the NBA exerts monopsony power, okay? So we've got some monopsony power going on compared to a perfectly competitive league. The NBA will have which of the following, right? So this will kind of give us a nice quick little review of monopsony power. So a lot of stuff that we've looked at since the last exam, a lot of labor market stuff. So when you're studying, kind of looking at those, it would be the best. So let's think about what monopsony power does. Okay. So I have my supply curve for labor, this demand curve for labor. And with monopsony power, right, it was kind of the reverse of monopoly power, right? If I have a monopsony in a market, what that means is I'm the only consumer of that good, in this case, labor. So I'll make my decisions not off a twice as steep marginal revenue curve, but a twice as steep marginal expenditure curve. And it's twice as steep as supply. So teams are going to be making their decision based off of this twice as steep marginal expenditure curve. So relative to the perfectly competitive point, where the perfectly competitive point is just where supply is equal to demand with no monopsony power. So we'll call this perfectly competitive. And here's the equilibrium wage for the perfectly competitive market. With monopsony power, we choose the quantity where the marginal expenditure curve hits that demand curve. Right? So kind of remember before, supply was our marginal cost, right? But if we're able to choose the quantity, we would optimally do so based off of this marginal expenditure curve. So marginal expenditure is equal to demand. We then don't go across to get the wage, right? Because if we have monopsony power, we're the only employer. Well, we know that at this quantity that we want to choose, the workers are willing to supply their labor at whatever point we're at on the supply curve, right? As long as we pay them this wage or higher, they'd be willing to supply this amount of labor. So if we know if they take the job or they supply their labor for any wage in this range, I'm just going to choose the lowest wage if I'm in the league. So we get that this kind of equilibrium wage in the monopsony market is going to be a little bit lower than what it was in a perfectly competitive market. Any questions on that? And the kind of optimal amount of labor units is going to be lower as well. Any questions on this one? So what would happen? Let's think about something I can combine here. So let's say that this is what's going on, but then we also have kind of a union enter the scene, right? So we've got our equilibrium wage here, but then we have a union kind of in whatever sport this is as well. I forget what the example was, but whatever sport this is. Well, now this would be kind of the desired quantity of labor and the optimal wage that the monopsony would want. But for the monopoly, you can think about, right, they're going to have some twice as steep marginal revenue curve. Right? What does that union do? Well, the union, their optimal quantity would be wherever marginal revenue is equal to supply. So kind of with monopsony power, we had where is demand equal to marginal expenditure. Monopoly power in the labor market, where does the marginal revenue equal our supply curve? So we go down here, try to fit this all on the same slide. And here I'm gonna have to write the word out so we don't confuse the two. So before M was the monopsony, now we have the quantity the monopolist would like, and he knows at that quantity, workers would supply their labor for whatever point, sorry, not supply. The players know that the teams would be willing to pay up to the point that they're at on their demand curve for that specific quantity of labor. So now we've got kind of the equilibrium wage that a monopoly would arrive on. Now, where are we going to arrive at? We don't know, right? It's going to be somewhere, the equilibrium wage, kind of our average wage will end up being somewhere between these 2 points, right? The wage the monopolist and the monopsonist would want. But from here, it opens a whole different set of issues, was this idea of where we have kind of these threat points, right? And where we might have some negotiations going on. So we can only kind of give this range, right, of where the wage is going to be. So I added a lot to that problem, right? This is the idea that I'll show you kind of how to solve the original problem, but I might add some additional stuff in as well. Okay. Any questions on this? We're okay with this? right? And potentially you could be asked a question where you just have the monopoly power of the union as well, right? So I'm kind of combining them here, but you could have questions that ask for either one independently, which is like question 2 asks specifically about the monopsony power. Number 3, can work through here. I basically just drew the graph for it, right? So, oh wait, no, I didn't. Did I? So we got a players union and the NFL are arguing over wages. What's the range? Oh yeah. So basically this is combining. Let's say we not only have monopoly power, or monopsony power, we also have monopoly power, but I'm giving you some actual equations, right? So let me write these down before we go back. So I just have them in front of me. So I've got the wage is equal to 60 minus 2Q, and my supply is 15 plus 2Q. All right, so I kind of kept the numbers hopefully a little bit easy. So we've got our demand for labor and our supply curve for labor equations. So what I'm going to do is, how can I solve for this monopsony wage first? Well, that was the point, the quantity at which my demand curve was equal to that marginal expenditure curve. So I've got my demand curve down here, but what will my marginal expenditure curve be? Well, that's just going to be my supply curve, but twice as steep. So instead of 2Q, this would be 4Q. From here, it's just a matter of setting my marginal expenditure, my demand curve equal to each other. Right? So if I do that, right, demand was 60 minus 2Q, and I'll set that equal to my marginal expenditure curve, which was 15 plus 4Q. Right? Now it's just a little bit of algebra to solve for what that equilibrium monopsony quantity is. Right? So I move some things around here. I subtract 15 from both sides, I get 45. I add 2Q to both sides, I get 6Q. So my equilibrium quantity here, I probably forgot my calculator. I probably can't do all this math in my head. But if I do what? 45 over 6, 7.5. Right? So I got this quantity now. Well, how can I solve the wage? Well, the monopsony wage would be wherever I'm at on that supply curve at that quantity. So I could plug that quantity back into my supply curve, which I've got the equation for down here. So simply, I have to keep going back and forth here. So I go 7.5, plug it into my supply curve. So the equilibrium wage would be 15 plus 2 times that quantity of 7.5, right? So I've got an equilibrium wage here of what, 30? I say equilibrium wage. We're solving for the monopsonous wage here. So here we just solve for that would be 30. Okay. How would I solve for the quantity? So I've got the, what the monopsonous want. How do I solve for the wage the monopolist would want? What would be the first thing I do? So if I'm trying to just think about, like, I know I've got these overlaid on each other, but if I'm just thinking about kind of the what the union power is, the monopoly power, how would they find this optimal quantity for the monopolist? That's the point at which what? So it's, so that's where marginal revenue is equal to supply, okay? So I've got my supply curve right here, but I don't have my marginal revenue curve. Well, remember, my marginal revenue curve is simply my demand curve, but twice as steep. So 60 minus 4Q, right? From there, it's just setting those two equations equal to each other, my marginal revenue curve and my supply curve. So 15 plus 2Q, right, would be equal to 60 minus 4Q. Once again, just a little bit of kind of moving things around. So I've got what? 45 is equal to 6Q. Q is equal to 45 over 6, or 7.5. So actually, the way that I drew this doesn't quite match up with the numbers because just the way it worked out, and I might have chosen these numbers for a reason, the monopolist and the monopsonist actually both want the same quantity, right? So if I was to draw this graph to scale after I made the calculations, I'm actually going to find that the quantity the monopolist and monopsonist want were actually the exact same. Okay? Now the difference is, now that I know that this is the kind of monopolist's optimal quantity, how do I find the wage the monopolist would want? Well, unlike for the monopsonist, I don't find the point where I'm at in the supply curve, right? I was finding the point that I'm at up here on the demand curve. So I'll plug in that 7.5 into my demand curve. So I've got my demand curve right here. Well, actually, instead of just having to keep going back down and forth, probably have enough room right here. 60 minus 2 times 7.5, right? Or the wage that the monopolist would want is 45. Okay? So I now have two values. I now know the range of where that equilibrium wage is going to fall. So basically, I'll solve for the equilibrium wage that the monopolist would want, and then I would solve for the wage, the equilibrium wage the monopsonist would want, and that would give me my range. I don't have to like really do those simultaneously. I can kind of understand what the wage would, do them separately and then kind of have this range in between. And then I probably will choose, for the exam, I'll probably try to choose some nicer numbers, maybe kind of like this, where the equilibrium quantities for the two ended up being the same. Made it a little bit easier to think about. Okay. Does anyone want to see any of this again? I don't know if I was moving around too fast and didn't have enough time to write anything down, but any questions on this or? So I'm going to kind of redraw this to go with the numbers and just show you one other thing that you might have to find. Okay? So I'm going to redraw this here real quick, because now that I know that quantity both of them wanted, so I'll kind of keep it simple. Actually, we'll just look at one of them just to make it a little bit easier. And we'll kind of stick with the one that we originally had, which was, I believe, was the monopsonist, right? So this kind of goes back to problem 2, right? So we said they choose this as the equilibrium quantity. We found that this was 7.5. The wage that they would like to charge, the equilibrium wage, was 30. If I was to ask here, what would the deadweight loss be? Right? The deadweight loss is going to be all the surplus lost, or the area in between the demand and supply curve, past the point of the new equilibrium quantity. Right? The new equilibrium quantity is lower, so we're losing out on all this surplus if we're comparing to a perfectly competitive market. Because the perfectly competitive market, remember, our equilibrium was all the way out here, right? And we don't know what that equilibrium wage and equilibrium quantity are, right? But we know this is the area that represents our deadweight loss. Okay? So we have a little bit of work to do here, because in order to calculate what that is, I need to find out what this value is. But we kind of actually already did this. Yeah. So we're just thinking about, so if we're trying to go back, this was like problem 2. We're just thinking about if we just had monopsonist power. Yep. So I put that together with monopoly power. Now we're taking a step back saying, okay, not any monopoly power, just another type of question we could be asked about monopsony power. So if I want to find this deadweight loss, really all it is at this point is I'm looking at this quantity. What point am I at on either my demand or my marginal expenditure curve? Well, it's kind of nice because we actually already did this earlier when we plugged in 7.5 into that demand curve, right? We had what, 60 minus 2 times 7.5. So we can find that point is 45. And that was simply using my demand curve for labor and plugging in that quantity that I'm looking at. I'm trying to find, okay, what is the value at this quantity on the demand curve? Now to find my other point that I need to find the area of this triangle, that's going to be the point where supply is equal to demand. So all I do there is set my demand curve for labor, which was 60 minus 2Q, equal to my supply curve for labor, which was 15 plus 2. Now it's just a little bit of algebra. I get 45 is equal to 4Q. So Q is equal to 45 over 4, which I believe is 12.5 if I'm doing the math in my head correctly here. So now I have all the points. I just find the kind of height and the length of my, or base and the height, right? So the base here is 5 times the height, which is 15. And then it's a triangle, so I also have to remember that I multiply by 2, right? So that would be kind of a scenario where if I asked you for the deadweight loss, this is how you could calculate it. Okay. Is everyone kind of clear on where I ended there? I mean, I didn't write out exactly the equation you're using there, but you've got the base of your triangle is the difference between these two values, 5. Height is the difference between these two values of 15. 5 times 15 times, it's a triangle, so times 1/2. Okay. It's the area of a triangle. Oh, is it 11.25? Nope, probably. That's what happens when I don't think hard enough. Sorry, this should be 11.25. Still kind of a similar kind of procedure there of finding the deadweight loss. Okay. Questions on that one? Okay. So let's go to a couple that are, we'll kind of skip these for today. Because I know there's someone here that I wanted to go through that would be helpful. Okay. So we'll do 1, and then we'll go 1 through 3 probably for sure here. So how might the NCAA tournament not requiring teams to share money they receive for making and winning in the tournament affect competitive balance in the following ways? So we're thinking about here, if we're going from a scenario where teams that made it into the NCAA tournament, so for basketball, they used to, receive a certain amount of money for this, and they had to share it with the rest of their conference. They no longer have to, right? So how is that going to affect competitive balance in the following ways across the league, within the Power 5, or within conferences outside the Power 5? And I think I'm going to add a caveat here because I was thinking about, just kind of my knowledge of the NCAA tournament, but we'll add in here, not requiring teams to share the money they receive for making and winning in the tournament. Whoops. While still maintaining, maintaining automatic bids, right? So the idea that they still give every single conference kind of, if their conference winner wins, they give them an automatic bid, right? So we're going to, it's like nothing else has changed, but that part will be important when we try to analyze the impacts on competitive balance, okay? So I think one of your homework questions was more like with football money. So that one, we don't have any automatic bids. Here we've got automatic bids, and now we're not requiring teams to share the money with their conference. So this is one thing that I've noticed on the homeworks as I'm grading them. Just really on the exam, it becomes more important. Read the question carefully, maybe even before you go to answer it. Look here and say, okay, I was asked about competitive balance across the league, within the Power 5, and within conferences outside. So I need 3 answers here, right? Like I need to say 3 things, right? So on a lot, like in the homework, sometimes I'd ask, right, I had this where it had like, what happens to a cross and what happens with, and there'd be one answer about competitive balance does this. Well, no. I'm asking you about 3 different avenues because the potential changes are different in each one of those scenarios, right? So for the first one, we have across the league, right? This is probably going to be maybe made it more difficult. And spoiler alert, anytime you're asked about competitive league, across the league, competitive balance, answer is probably going to be ambiguous. Not all the time, but a lot of times, right? So let's think about this one, right? Maybe across the league will be the most difficult, so we'll leave that one for the end. So what's going to happen within the Power 5, right? So we're no longer requiring teams to kind of share money, So if we think about within the Power 5, what's going to happen? Well, the best teams, right, that make it into the tournament and win and receive this money, keep the money. Right? The lower quality teams in that conference are more likely to also be in the tournament potentially because they are in the Power 5, right? So maybe within, those bottom quality teams, maybe they're still making the tournament. But if some of them aren't, even if one of them aren't, they are receiving zero money that year. So you're having the lowest quality team receive $0. The highest quality teams receive whatever they were before, but now instead of sharing it, they get to just keep all of it, right? So you would think that we would see kind of worsened competitive balance, right? Competitive balance would get worse because your top teams keep all the money, kind of keep moving upward. Those bottom teams, if they miss out on making a tournament, they receive no money now, as opposed to when the conferences were sharing it. And so we would expect to see kind of competitive balance get worse. Right? Now, you could probably make an argument here that if you're thinking, and when I say within, when it says kind of within the conference for the Power Five, so I'm not asking like competitive balance across the Power Five, like within each one of the Power Five conferences. Now, you could argue here that if you had a conference that was so good that everyone was making it, that there would be no change in competitive balance. Right? That would be a possible answer. I think probably not likely because, any example you can think of, there's at least one team who wouldn't be making the tournament, so now they receive $0 as opposed to getting some money from all the other teams in the conference that made it. Okay. If I think about what happens to within competitive balance in the non-Power Five, right? Well, it's going to be a same kind of similar sort of scenario, right? But if we look at the non-Power Five, we at least have one team who's going to get money, but that one team will always be kind of that conference winner, right? Or more than likely than not, the best team in that conference. So we're same sort of scenario, right? We're still going to see competitive balance gets worse because now that team keeps all the money, doesn't share it with the rest. But if I had to say which of these decreases in competitive balance is probably going to be larger, which one would you think? Yeah, probably the non-Power Five, right? Because, within the Power Five, like we said, a lot of the teams make the tournament anyways, and so a lot of them are going to kind of be moving up. If we look across time, like in any given year, like there'll probably be some teams that make it some year, others that don't the other. But in these non-Power Five, we usually only have one or two teams making it. So you're going to have just that one team pull completely away from every other team. Well, as here, your top five teams, yeah, they're moving away from the bottom five, but at least you still have those top five teams kind of close and similar in quality. Here, you're just having this one team move probably really far away from the rest of the conference, right? Because I say one, you could have one or two teams, right, depending on which non-Power Five you're looking at, but you would expect a higher number of teams not to make it into the tournament from the non-Power Five. So before, when they could get one or two teams in, well, that was great for the conference because every team got a little piece of that pie, right? So if we were to compare those two, the question didn't ask for that, but just kind of completing this scenario. Any questions here until we, before we talk about this next idea? Let me make sure there's nothing here in the chat. Okay. So across the league's a little bit tougher, right? Because there's going to be several different things that are impacting competitive balance. So first of all, within these conferences, we can see things are getting worse. So more likely than not, that effect probably will dominate, right? But let's think about what's happening with the top teams in non-Power Five conferences. They're going to be now getting even better than they were before, right? Because they're keeping all of the money. So if we look at the top teams in the non-Power Five, when they play the Power Five now, what's going to happen relative to before? They're moving closer in quality. It's going to be more competitive. Now, what happens if the Power Five teams play the lower quality teams in the non-Power Five? Well, they're moving even further away than they were before. So you can see this lane where the top teams in these non-Power Five conferences will now be more competitive with the Power Five. Not only will they be more competitive with the Power Five, if you think about it, the low quality teams in the Power Five, well, now they're getting even closer to those top teams in the non-Power Five, right? Because the lower quality teams in the Power Five are getting worse, right? They're not getting any of that revenue sharing anymore. So now when those lower quality teams in the Power Five start to play anybody in these non-Power Five, they're going to be more similar in quality. So there's several different, so there is a way in which, to some degree, maybe competitive balance is getting a little bit better. Now, if we're trying to say, do those effects overcome the larger impacts that the top teams, because they're keeping all the money, are just going to skyrocket to the top, and the lower quality teams are getting $0, going to start to go more towards the bottom? Probably not, right? The overall effect probably is going to be that we see a decrease in competitive balance. But unless we have some information on the size of the winnings, how much impact that's going to have on the team quality, we really can't say. Like, there's going to be some components of this new rule that improve competitive balance, but probably more that decrease it, right? But we really don't know unless we have any more information on the size of these changes. So think about, if we're talking about competitive balance, right? Yeah, so if we're thinking about these non-Power Fives, right? I mean, really, it's similar across power or non-power. The lowest quality teams are going to now get $0, right? So they're getting worse. Right? So the lower quality teams in the non-Power Five are going to be, are going to be less competitive with every other team, right? The better teams in their conference, but also, even the teams in the Power Five. Excuse me. So, but what you want to try to break down is, within each of these conferences, low and high quality teams might be impacted differently. So if I think about high quality non-Power Five, right? They're going to be getting a lot better, right? Because the high quality teams, they get to keep all the money now instead of sharing it. If I then think about the low quality teams in the Power Five, well, they're actually going to be getting worse, right? They're not making it to turn, they get $0. Now there's no revenue sharing. So whenever we see matchups between these teams, what's going to be true about these matchups? Well, they're now more competitive, right? The Power Five conference teams are now, closer in quality to the non-Power Five, at least those at the top, right? I think it's hard to think about the total effect not being a decrease in competitive balance. But we don't know. Until we know exactly how many teams are in each conference and how many of these matchups there are relative to other ones, we don't really know. So this here, right, these matchups would help improve competitive balance. Now, if we think about the low quality teams in the non-Power Five, well, they're just going to get worse, right? And so if we think about what happens when they go up against low quality or high quality teams in the Power Five, well, more likely than not, right, we're just going to get sorry. So the lower high quality teams in the Power Five, I'll get rid of this. Let's just do the high quality teams. Okay? So now these high quality teams in the Power Five are keeping all the money and getting better. So now when we see these matchups, well, competitive balance is going to get a lot worse, right? So, the ultimate effect is going to be that it's ambiguous, because we have things that are moving in opposite directions. Now, when it comes to answering this question, like on the exam, what you should try to think about is the differences that this is going to create for low and high quality teams within each conference. All I would be looking for there is, as long as you identify one of the ways in which competitive balance could get worse, one of the ways in which competitive balance could get better, and then just say it's ambiguous, you get full credit, right? I could go through and do a bunch of other combinations here. So maybe I do, well, what about when the high quality teams in the Power Five face, right, low quality teams in the Power Five? Well, the high quality teams were getting better, lower quality teams are getting worse. This decreases competitive balance. And I could add in a whole bunch of different cross-conference, cross-quality. All I'm looking for there is, as long as they're, as long as you mention one of each way in which it can increase or decrease competitive balance, and that's fine. Now, there could be a scenario, this type of change doesn't do this, but there could be a scenario where there's only one direction in which competitive balance can move. So for instance, let's think about, instead of bowl game money, right? Let's just think about if I went from a scenario where teams could have no local deals, right? To like, local broadcast deals, to where now I allow every college team to have their own. I mean, unless you can come up with a real creative one, I mean, if you can give me a logical explanation how you could see a improvement in competitive balance from that, I'll listen to you. And if it's justified, then that's fine. But in that scenario, every high quality team is going to be the one that's more likely to make more deals, and they don't have to share any of the money. They're just going to move towards the top. The bottom teams don't have any room to move. They're not getting any deals. So in that scenario, you can't really paint a picture where competitive balance is going to do anything but get worse, right? But in these situations where it's a little bit more ambiguous, I'm just looking for you to name one of the ways in which it gets better and one of the ways in which it could get worse. And then kind of it's ambiguous unless we knew the size of these impacts. Yeah. Did someone else say any other questions? Any other questions on this before we kind of leave this idea? So these are definitely ones that are a little bit harder to think about. Try to think about as many angles as you can. Number 2, short answer. So assume we had both male and female soccer had identical revenues, right? And they're both interested in a player with an identical marginal wins coming from their labor or quality. If the high quality female soccer player salary was lower, what's one possible explanation other than gender discrimination that could explain this? So we see male and female soccer kind of having identical revenues here. Both are interested in a similar quality, okay? So we've got a measure that looks like demand is similar between male and female kind of soccer teams here. Right? What's one possible explanation other than gender discrimination? So if I'm thinking about what I'm looking at here, so what was I getting at this one? I should have left this open for a male and female soccer head. So let's do this at the I think the word that I left out here is ticket revenues when I was writing this. So let's say they have identical ticket revenues. Okay. So what I wanted to use with these ticket revenues is that revenue is comprised of 2 things, right? So I've got total revenue is a function of price and quantity, right? So it could be that if I had differences in the capacity of these different, 2 different leagues, that lower quantity could be compensated for by higher prices, right? And that it could be that because in the ticket market we have this vertical, so this is where some of the early stuff kind of bleeds over into what we're doing now. So just because I've got my capacity constraint fixed here, right, this would result in a certain quantity and price. Right? If I chose a different capacity constraint, so let's say this was demand for kind of the men's soccer team. I then have demand for women's. So I know you probably can't read that. Women's W, however you want to kind of use that. Yeah. But they, so we got a little bit lower. But what they did was they chose a more optimal stadium capacity for their demand curve. Well, actually here I didn't draw this a way in which that's going to be correct. So let's say they chose something like this, a real low capacity to where they can get a higher price, right, but a lower quantity, right? And I think the way, because I drew these kind of like a linear shift, it would have to be that like one of the demand curves is a little bit steeper, right? They would need different elasticities, but it could be that I could see the same revenue if I had capacity differences where I actually still see the demand for men's soccer would be higher, or vice versa, really. Doesn't matter kind of which one we're comparing, but if we had any differences in capacity, we could still have demand for one sport be higher than in the other, right? However, if we're really trying to say, is discrimination going on here? I mean, there's a lot more that matters other than ticket revenue. So let's say we had just overall revenue being the same. Well, if overall revenue for the sport is the same, we're looking at that labor market. So this is one aspect we could think about, that it could be operating through the ticket market if I had thrown that additional word in there. But if I didn't, right? If I go back and I just say, okay, what if we have identical revenues? Because you could argue, well, you know, maybe men's, like I had, if I can get this back on here, like I had drawn, men's demand could be higher, but based off of the capacity, maybe we end up with the same revenues in the ticket market. But if the demand for the sport's higher in other markets, they'll earn higher revenue, which would play into the demand curve for labor, right? Marginal revenue per win. It's not marginal ticket revenue per win, it's marginal revenue per win. Well, let's say we get rid of that. Let's say it's not just ticket revenue, it's the same, it's all revenue. So we're thinking about, when we think about that demand curve for labor, we're now thinking about the marginal revenue per win, and we said quality is the same. This should be identical between men's and women's soccer. So let's draw on this demand curve for labor, and we'll say that demand curve for women's labor is the same as for men's, right? So at this point, what's the only other thing that could drive wage differences? Well, haven't I drawn on here yet? Supply, right? If we have any differences in the supply curve for labor between men and women, so let's say supply curve for men is up here, so we get our equilibrium wage, and then our supply curve for, I guess not female here, we're doing women's soccer. Well, those supply differences could potentially predict that I see wage differentials, even if the demand curve, right, even if marginal revenue per win was the same across these two. Okay? So this was kind of like not really needed for the original question. I just wanted to change it to like also address this issue that for total revenue, if we're looking at the ticket market, price and quantity matter there. Okay? But if we're just talking about overall revenues, were the same, which was originally what the question asked, we would be thinking about has to be driven, wage differentials would have to be driven by supply differences, unless it was actually discrimination, right? That would be the kind of the other option. Okay. Any questions? I know I kind of changed initially and then kind of went back through and went back to the original, but I wanted to kind of mention that idea that in the ticket market, even if revenues are the same, right, we could have a demand curve be higher in one because it's really the combination of price and quantity, and capacity constraints could impact that quantity amount quite a bit. And one thing I'll mention as we're working through these practice problems are much more open-ended than what the exam questions will be. The exam questions will be a little bit more, really precise about the assumptions that we're making. Even if it's things that I would think that you would assume, I'll kind of throw it in there. But yeah. Yeah.
On the test, will it be like clearly stated if we are supposed to make a graph or sort of understand what the question is?
Yeah, so if I'm grading it off of wanting to see that you can give a graphical depiction, I'll explicitly put in there. I think in these, I probably didn't put in any of them because I knew that I was going to be going through them with you guys. So yeah, actually it looks like I don't put, these aren't written. That's what I'm kind of saying. I didn't write these the same way in which I would the final exam questions because I'm looking to grade on specific things in the exam questions, whereas these practice problems are more to like motivate kind of us, what we're working through here, and also just think about a question in a more broad sense, right? When I need to like grade on specific things, I have to be a little bit more acute about what I'm asking and not leave it as open-ended as I am these questions. But the multiple choice are probably a better example of kind of like looking for those precise things. Any other questions on that one before we keep moving? You want me? I probably don't need to go back to the drawing here. So let's do number 3. So now let's assume that we have owner discrimination. So employer discrimination going on against Black Major League Baseball players. However, consumers and advertising agencies are not. Explain using graphs and labor market why top quality Black players, stars, could still see close to equilibrium wages, and why low quality Black players would see lower wages than non-Black players of similar quality. So we've got an example here. We've got employer discrimination, right? So we've got kind of owner discrimination going on. But consumers and advertising agencies are not. So this is a little bit of a tricky one. So if I think about what's going on here, combining two things here. So the very first thing we're going to analyze is just what would the impact of the employer discrimination be? Okay. So we've got our supply curve for labor. We've got our demand curve for labor. And kind of this would be, we have non-Black players because the discrimination is against Black players. So what the discrimination does is essentially add in this additional cost. So if I'm thinking about my demand curve for labor, right, which we had earlier, it's almost like you've got this additional cost that's coming from discrimination. Right? So what that's going to do is kind of shift that demand curve to be lower for the same quality player, but a player who's Black as opposed to non-Black. Right? So it's going to shift down that demand curve. However, if we're thinking about the marginal revenue, we're thinking about the demand that's coming in from consumers and broadcast companies, they're not discriminatory. Excuse me. And if we're thinking about that, I think the second part of the question was asking about kind of what's going to be true about top quality Black players as opposed to low quality. Right? Well, for top quality Black, the higher quality is going to shift that demand curve even higher, right? So for the high quality players, there's going to be an even higher demand curve. So we could almost think about this just allowed us to identify the differences of the same quality player from this discrimination, right? So what I'm going to do here is call, we're going to say that this is low quality, and here we also have kind of low quality player, right? Oh, sorry. Wait, why didn't that? Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So what I have here was simply identifying the difference that was caused, same quality player, but from discrimination. So here, let's assume that these were for the low quality player. Now, we've got the same discrimination going on for high quality players, but we know that for high quality players, their demand curves would be higher, right? Because the marginal wins that they're adding is going to be higher. So I can draw this as, I'll draw these with the green line. So what do I want to do here? I want to make sure my high quality, so let's say I saw a pretty large shift. So here is the demand for high quality Black players, which would mean my demand for high quality non-Black players would be somewhere way up here, right? I saw this shift, right, when I'm comparing low to high quality players. And you could have done this in reverse. Like you could have thought of like just the difference. I don't know if I can do this. So you could have just been thinking about how does the difference in quality shift the demand curve, and then add in, okay, if we have discrimination going on, then that would shift both the demand curves down, right? So you can do it kind of starting out with either aspect. There's kind of two components in this question. We need to be able to, incorporate both of them. So now it's just a matter of, looking at these equilibrium wages. You can kind of see here, if I've got, here's low quality, black. Here we had the wage for low quality non-black player. And then up here, we've got our wages for high quality black player, and then our wage for our high quality non-black player, right? So, the way in which I drew the size of the discrimination here, it ended up that high quality black players still are making more than low quality non-black players, right? But they're not making near as much as high quality non-black players. Right? So this is the way in which look, we know that discrimination is going to pull those demand curves down for our black players, but the quality, if we're looking at high quality black players, that's going to, the increase in quality pushes that demand curve back up, so that potentially it could kind of overcome this discrimination. Now, when I say overcome it, it overcomes it in the sense that they can earn wages that are higher than kind of non-black players, but it doesn't overcome it in the sense that there's no way that you can overcome the discrimination so that black players of high quality are earning more than non-black players of high quality, as long as we're comparing, like saying high quality, that they're both like the same. Like the high quality players have the same quality and the low quality players have the same, but the high quality is above the low quality, right? So this would be kind of the model. Sorry, it's a little crooked. The model in which you're thinking, right? There's going to be some difference caused in discrimination for the demand curve for black and non-black players. But then we also think about the demand curve for labor is also going to be different for high versus low quality. Excuse me. Any questions on that one? So let me go back. Let me make sure. Why would low quality black players see lower wages than not? Yeah. All right, so I want to do some more here with this discrimination idea. So one thing I saw some confusion on in the homework assignment for was thinking about not employer discrimination, but what happens if we have employee discrimination, right? So this is the idea that certain people don't want to work with other people because of X, Y, and Z, right? So just to like really kind of hammer home this idea, let's say we're looking at our labor market and we've got, here's our demand curve, here's our supply curve, excuse me. And I'm going to do, I think the one in which I used in the homework was, so we'll do, here's our non-discriminatory employees, right? If they're non-discriminatory, there's no changes anywhere. However, if our employees are discriminatory, it doesn't change the value of any player, right? It doesn't, to the team, it doesn't change the value in the sense that there's no additional cost to the team from employing that player, holding everything else constant. However, for the employees, if they're playing with other players that they're discriminatory towards, it's almost as though you've added an additional cost, right? So if the supply curve, think about it this way. So I'll call ND for non-discriminatory, and we'll call supply curve for labor for discriminatory S subscript D. So this is just going to be the marginal cost, right? The supply curve for labor is the marginal cost of supplying that labor. For the discriminatory employee, it's the marginal costs plus this kind of like taste for discrimination, right? So it's almost like there's an additional cost to that discriminating employee from playing with others of that group that he discriminates against. So adding in costs at the same quantity would mean that the costs are higher. So it's actually, right, a decrease in my supply curve. or that at every quantity, my costs are now incorporating this additional discrimination. It's kind of like a tax, right? Taxes kind of decrease our supply curve because they're increasing our marginal costs. Same idea with discrimination. So the supply curve for that discriminating employee is going to be kind of up and to the left, right, or a decrease. Right? So if I wanted to hire each one of these employees, the only wage at which they would provide their labor to me, or the equilibrium wage, would be discriminating employees would require a higher wage. Right? Now, if I have the option and there is, tons of players at every single quality level, well, when I'm looking at this, if I want a certain amount of labor, I'm going to say, well, look, I need these players to at least put in a certain threshold of labor. Like over the course of the season, even if I wanted to break this down into the number of games, I need them, if I'm a football team, to play 16 games. So if I wanted to, I could think about, okay, no matter where the equilibrium points are at, let's say the quantity is fixed, right? I need the quantity of labor to be 16 games. If I'm measuring the quantity of labor in games here, well, to supply 16 games of labor, the non-discriminating employee would take this wage, while the discriminating employee would need a wage that was this much higher. Remember, they're the same quality. There's no differences in the demand curve between these players. So who am I going to choose? Well, if I'm getting the same value, right? Here's the value of the player. I can pay the non-discriminatory player a little bit lower wage. I'd actually have to pay the discriminatory player a wage higher than what their value is to the team. So I'm always going to choose to hire that non-discriminating worker. Yeah, so that kind of gets at the differences there in the supply curve. What if, let me think of a wrinkle I can throw into this one. Okay, I'll give you an extreme scenario. Okay, so I'm going to redraw this real quick, and as I do, I'll kind of mention what's going on. So let's just go back to clean that up a little bit so that we've got the same demand here. We've got a demand curve here, and we've got supply for the non-discriminatory, supply for the discriminatory, right? Well, let's say that every single and I guess we can go back to using kind of the example from problem 3, which was what? Black and non-black players. So let's say all of our non-black players are all discriminatory, right? So all their supply curves are shifted up, whereas all of our kind of black players are non-discriminatory, right? And we also have that the demand for, so we can think about our discriminatory is really now the same as kind of non-black, because we said all of them are discriminatory. And the supply curve for non-discriminatory is really just the supply of black players. Right? Let's assume that for whatever reason, we had that the black players on average have a higher marginal wins per labor, right? Or are of higher quality. And you could kind of do it in either direction, but let's just assume they are. So if we think about then our demand curve for non-black players, if they are of lower quality, then we should see the demand for black players be a little bit higher, right? Well, now we can think about, well, where would the equilibrium wages be? Well, all of our black players, right, we know are non-discriminatory. So here would kind of be our equilibrium wage for black players. For non-black players, right, all of them are discriminatory. So we're kind of looking at this supply curve, but they're of lower quality. So you could actually get, I try to draw this over here, you could actually get that the wages for non-black and black players are exactly the same. And behind this, what's hidden is if there's quality differences, and you don't even really need everyone, but the vast majority of the discriminatory group, right, is of lower quality, you could actually end up seeing that you have the same wages, even though there's discrimination going on from in the background, right, from the employees in the background. And, you know, if I had drawn this shift a little bit more, right, like let's say I didn't draw the qualities or differences in quality as much, then, you know, maybe wages for non-black players would be higher or lower. Here I drew them exactly the same to prove the point, right? That these differences in quality can mask the differences in employee discrimination. Okay. Any questions on this one? This one's a little bit different. So what I would have to do here, though, is like imply that, you know, that's one thing I also saw in the homework I want you to be careful of. When I say it's a discriminatory employee, well, unless I explicitly tell you that every non-black player is discriminatory, well, then some of the white players, if some of them weren't discriminatory, they'd actually still be down here on the supply curve as well. So you can almost think about a scenario where if I did have some non-black employees that were not discriminating, so the demand curve for them would be here, they're not discriminating, you could actually see that here we can think about this would be the wage for non-black employees who are not discriminating. What's kind of ironic, I don't know if ironic's the right word, maybe the sad irony of this is that for those non-discriminating non-black players, they actually receive lower wages than those who were discriminatory. You know, unless, you know, we have the option between the two and there's multiple players at every quality level, then right, I'm not going to pay the premium. But if there wasn't, right, and there was only one kind of quality player at each level, potentially we see that going on. Right? Okay. Any questions on this one? Or what if I had added something or changed something else? We don't have a lot of time left, but I'm going to kind of outline maybe some, and I'll do this again on Thursday with a little bit more, whatever I forget to mention today. But as you're kind of thinking about what to study, if you're looking at the answer keys, once I said the fourth one should be up there later today. The fifth one I'll get posted as soon as the due date has passed. I believe it's Friday, right? So I'll get it posted kind of Saturday at some point. Using those and then these practice problems and what we're doing in class, I would say there's a couple of key things that we really should kind of focus on, especially if you then, after studying, want to go back to the notes. So for one, we should understand how the three things operate. So you can call this like A, B, and C, right? We should understand employer and consumer discrimination, right? These work very similar. You can kind of think about these will shift the demand curve, right? You then have employee, right, discrimination. This should be shifting your supply curve, right? And understanding kind of all the how this is operating. Going back when you're studying these, you should be able to draw graphs for each one of these scenarios, right? Employer, consumer, and employee discrimination. Okay. You then also want to go back and this kind of ties in a lot of the examples we use. It's like we use discrimination and differences in quality, but differences in the quality of the labor go all the way back to understanding kind of the demand curve for labor, right? So think about how small versus large market, right? This is going to change your marginal revenue per win, right? So we can think about there's demand curve differences in labor for large and small market, and that's really kind of operating through this marginal revenue per win. You could probably use other things here as well, like instead of small and large, maybe we're comparing across two different sports or something like that. We can also then think about how quality differences, right? Low versus high quality, which that's really, I guess if I'm keeping this consistent, operating through that marginal wins, right, per unit of labor. So we kind of would review those. Oh, I started writing and then realized I wanted to keep the format the same and use arrows here. Some other things that'd be good to review that we kind of already talked about today, but understand how unions can kind of impact that labor market. Going back to even unions, we worked through a lot of examples, and I could throw this at you with like a, no, I won't do that. I'll just kind of use anytime we do a numerical example, it would be solving for like an equilibrium with no market power or with monopoly or monopsony power, right? So with the unions though, if you go back and review, we had kind of two. One was industrial, one was craft. So craft kind of sets quantity. Industrial kind of is choosing kind of this equilibrium wage, right? I mean, they're both choosing quality. Craft was really kind of setting a, if you want to think about, they were setting a quantity by like limiting kind of membership here. We said most of our professional leagues are industrial, but if we go back far enough, we did have a homework example where we looked at a craft union as well. Craft, yep. And remember, kind of we think about unions, this is really one of the things is monopoly power in the labor market, right? We then also looked at things today where we were looking at monopsony power, right? So we took a look at that today, make sure you understand how that works and how that impacts equilibrium wages and quantities. Moving from there, thinking about competitive balance and kind of like revenue sharing, like kind of like the example we worked through today where you're going from you're sharing to not sharing with it's not really revenue sharing. It's like, well, it is. It's revenue sharing, I guess, like within conferences, right? And how that would impact things. From there, we'll probably try to focus a little bit more on this next topic, next class, which would be starting to thinking about wages in NCAA. You could think about variation across sport, variation across D1, D2, Power 5, non-Power 5, right? We can think of like, we talked about a couple different things, and really this is all really going back to just things that are changing the marginal revenue per win are the marginal wins that are coming from labor, right? So kind of reviewing some of those examples in the homework or the things that we talked about in class that would kind of vary wages across different colleges, different sports, which are really just shifts in our demand curve. Now, one thing that we did also talk about here, I guess, would be, I don't know, I'm not keeping this really consistent. I guess we can call this D, but shifts in supply due to opportunity costs. So the main example we used here was kind of the value of the education. So there's opportunity costs of going to, say, I don't know, the University of somewhere out east, Eastern Connecticut State or something, right? The opportunity cost of going there is, if I had the ability to go to Harvard and I'm not, that's a huge difference in what my degree value is going to be worth from, that I'm foregoing at Harvard relative to the value of my degree I'm getting from Eastern Connecticut State, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about these wages. I'll probably outline a little bit more in some of the collegiate discussion that we had, what you would want to kind of review, but I want to at least give you, try to start giving you a roadmap or a template as you're studying for this exam. Any questions from me before we kind of end for today? Now, if you want to look through those practice problems and you can identify some, because I think we'll be able to get through all of them next class, but I want to make sure that we start with ones and I go over ones that you guys have questions on. So if you do get a chance to take a look at that, bring in any that you think are more difficult or you're having problems with, especially after I get that answer key to those final problems up tomorrow. Other than that, if there's no questions, I will see you guys on Thursday.